In a distant galaxy, where the stars burned like distant beacons, the Koran Empire ruled with an iron fist. For centuries, their vast fleets had dominated space, crushing civilizations and bending the galaxy's weaker races to their will. The Koran were ruthless conquerors, their technology far beyond anything most species could comprehend. But despite their power, something had unsettled them about a recent development. Reports began flooding in from different sectors, strange accounts of human resistance, stories of a young and unremarkable species holding their ground against overwhelming odds. It was as if the humans didn't understand fear, and that terrified the Koran. Captain Alara, a leader renowned for her tactical brilliance and indomitable will, was assigned to investigate the human presence on a distant colony world. The reports had become so frequent that they couldn't be ignored any longer. The Koran Empire had to understand this anomaly, this strange new species that refused to cower, no matter the force that was brought against them. The Empire dispatched Elira to gather intelligence and, if necessary, eliminate the threat. She arrived with her battalion, confident in her ability to crush any resistance. Her ship descended onto the planet's surface, its enormous frame casting a long shadow over the terrain below. On the surface, things were eerily silent. The human colony was on the brink of destruction, its buildings reduced to rubble, its defenses shattered. The human resistance, however, was holding strong in a final stand. As Alara's forces advanced, she was prepared for the sight of scattered remnants, a few brave souls desperately trying to defend their homes. Instead, what she encountered was something far more unsettling. In the middle of a cratered battlefield, amidst the ruins of what had once been a bustling city, stood a single human soldier. He was alone, a mere sergeant, and yet, despite the overwhelming odds, he stood resolute. His uniform was torn and stained with blood. His rifle was slung across his back, but there was no fear in his eyes. His name, as Elira soon learned, was Sergeant David Carter. The rest of his squad had been slaughtered by the Koran forces, their bodies strewn across the battlefield like discarded toys. Yet Carter stood alone, facing the entire might of the Koran battalion with nothing but sheer determination in his gaze. Alara's gaze locked onto Carter, and for the first time in her career, she felt a twinge of doubt. The reports had said the humans were fearless, but this was something else. He didn't seem afraid of the Koran, not even in the face of certain death. Alara couldn't help herself. She approached him, her boots crunching on the debris beneath her feet. As she closed the distance, she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of conquest. "Why aren't you afraid, human?" she asked, her tone laced with amusement. She wanted to see if this was a trick, some form of bravado before the inevitable collapse. Sergeant Carter didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He simply stared at her with a calm intensity that sent a ripple through the Koran captain's composure. His reply was quiet, almost casual, but the weight of his words hit Alara like a force she hadn't anticipated. "Because I've seen worse. And I'm still standing." Alara's heart skipped a beat. She had expected defiance, perhaps anger, or a futile plea for mercy. Instead, this human, a mere soldier, stood there, unbroken, facing her as though she were just another obstacle. The simplicity of his words, combined with the calm in his voice, unsettled her. What kind of species was this that could face annihilation with such composure? She had seen countless species crumble before her, but humans? They seemed to do the opposite. They survived. Worse still, they thrived in situations where others would have surrendered long ago. Alara studied him, trying to make sense of this strange new puzzle before her. She had seen soldiers stare death in the face, but Carter wasn't just staring, he was defying it. What made him so different from the others? Was it sheer stupidity, or was there something more profound at play here? In her mind, 1,000 questions swirled, each one more troubling than the last. A wave of frustration swept over her. She had faced enemies that wielded weapons capable of obliterating entire fleets, and yet here stood this human, unafraid of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. He wasn't just defying her forces, he was defying the very nature of fear itself. The Koran Empire, for all its power and might, had never faced anything like this. "You think you can survive this?" Alara's voice was harsh now, her patience running thin. "Your people will be crushed, just like all the others who've defied us." Carter's expression remained unchanged, his gaze still locked on her with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "I don't think I'll survive. But as long as I'm still breathing, I'll make sure you remember why you should have been afraid." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. There was no arrogance in his voice, no boast. It was a simple, unshakable statement of resolve. Alara's eyes narrowed, but she couldn't dismiss what she had heard. This was no ordinary soldier. This was someone who had faced hell and emerged unscathed. In her long life, she had encountered countless warriors, but never one quite like this. The moment stretched on, the two locked in a silent battle of wills. Alara could feel the eyes of her battalion on her, waiting for her command. But her mind was elsewhere, grappling with this human soldier who, against all logic and reason, had refused to bend, to break, or to cower. It was a kind of strength she had never encountered before, a strength that, for a fleeting moment, made her question everything she thought she knew about power. As Alara took a step back, signaling her forces to hold their position, the battlefield seemed to hold its breath. Something had changed. The Korean Empire might have the power to crush this human colony, but for the first time, Alara wondered if she was facing something that couldn't be so easily destroyed. The battle was far from over. But Sergeant David Carter, with his calm defiance, had planted a seed of doubt in the heart of the Korean captain. And that, perhaps, was the most dangerous thing of all. This approach adds suspense, depth to the characters, and a sense of mounting tension as Alara starts to grapple with the unexpected power of the human spirit. "I've kept the writing engaging while using simple language as you requested." Captain Alara stood at the observation deck of her flagship, gazing out into the endless void of space. Her mind was occupied with the strange human she had encountered on the battlefield. Sergeant David Carter's unyielding courage in the face of certain death had shaken her. She had seen countless species break under pressure, but this human had not only survived but seemed to thrive. Alara's curiosity had been piqued, and her obsession to understand how a mere human could defy her overwhelming forces grew with each passing moment. There was something about his mind, something beyond her comprehension, that had intrigued her. It was time to find out what made the human spirit so unbreakable. She had brought Carter aboard her flagship, a massive vessel built for the most dangerous of missions, its sleek black surface reflecting the stars outside like a predator's eyes. Inside, the ship was lined with the most advanced technology the Korean Empire had to offer. The Korean were masters of manipulation, whether it was with weapons or minds, and they were renowned for their ability to extract information from even the most hardened of prisoners. Alara was determined that Carter would break under their methods. If she could only understand how he, and by extension, humanity, possessed such an unshakable will, she could use this knowledge to eliminate any future threat. The interrogation chamber was dimly lit, and its metallic walls hummed with energy. Carter was seated in a cold chair, his wrists shackled but otherwise unharmed. His eyes were calm, betraying no hint of fear or anxiety. Alara's trusted psionic specialist stood nearby, ready to assist with the mental probes. These Korean psionics were feared across the galaxy for their ability to reach into the deepest corners of a mind, unlocking secrets that others wished to keep hidden. Alara herself stood at the far end of the room, watching with a mix of anticipation and curiosity. This time, she would break the human spirit. The psionics activated the technology, and a soft whirring sound filled the room as the probe began to extend. It was designed to delve deep into the mind, extracting memories, emotions, and the very essence of a person's consciousness. Alara watched intently, expecting Carter to recoil in pain, to scream, or to beg for mercy. But what she witnessed was something unexpected. Carter's face remained unchanged, his eyes still calm as the Korean technology attempted to invade his mind. At first, the psionics were confident. They had never encountered anyone capable of resisting their probes. But as they pushed deeper, they began to encounter resistance, a wall of mental fortitude that they hadn't prepared for. The Korean technology, despite its sophistication, faltered. It couldn't penetrate the human mind as it could with other species. Alara's brow furrowed. This was not supposed to happen. She had never encountered anyone whose mental resilience could withstand the full force of Corin technology. Carter's calm voice broke the silence. "You think you can break me? You think you can find something in my mind that will make me bend to you?" His words were steady, unwavering. "I've been through worse. And I'm still here." Alara's eyes narrowed, a flicker of disbelief flashing across her face. The psionics, sensing the failure of their attempts, began to push harder, using every tool at their disposal. They delved into Carter's memories, seeking anything that might explain his strange strength. Yet, the deeper they went, the more the technology struggled to make sense of what it was encountering. The psionics were unable to fully grasp the structure of his thoughts. It was as if his mind was a labyrinth with no clear center, a vast network of experiences and emotions that refused to be ordered or deciphered. In an attempt to understand, Alara ordered the psionics to adjust their approach. "Don't focus just on his memories," she said, her voice sharp with frustration. "Probe his emotions. We need to understand his will to survive." And so, the psionics shifted their approach, directing their focus to the core of Carter's emotions. Alara watched as the room around her began to pulse with energy. The Corin technology flickered with intensity, but it still struggled. There was something unique about the human mind. It was resilient, adaptable, and unpredictable. For every push the psionics made, Carter's mind fought back with equal strength, as if it were guarding something precious. The Corin had never encountered anything like this before. As the probe pushed deeper, Carter began to speak, his voice carrying an almost nostalgic tone. "You want to know about humanity, don't you?" he said. "You want to know how we can survive against all odds? Let me tell you a story." The psionics paused their assault as Carter began to speak, his words quiet but firm. "When humanity first began to explore the stars, we were weak. We didn't have the power or the technology to fight back. We made mistakes. We almost wiped ourselves out. There were wars, famines, and betrayals by our own kind. We lost everything: our homes, our way of life, and for a time, even our hope." His voice grew more intense, a fire igniting behind his words. "But we fought back. We rebuilt. And when we were pushed to the edge, when everything seemed lost, we didn't fall. We survived." The psionics, despite their best efforts, could not break through the memories of loss, of failure, and of the survival that had defined humanity's history. They were caught in the vastness of Carter's experiences, each memory more complex and layered than the last. The technology struggled to find a single thread to pull, to unravel the human spirit. Alara watched in silence, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't just resistance, this was something far more powerful. Carter's mind was like an unbreakable fortress, built upon generations of struggle, survival, and an unrelenting drive to endure. The psionics stepped back, their faces pale and wary. They had failed. Carter's mind was simply too complex, too resilient. Alara's hands tightened into fists. She had always prided herself on her ability to control the battlefield, to command her forces with precision. But here, in this small room, she was confronted with something she couldn't understand, something that defied logic and reason. "Your technology isn't enough," Carter said, his voice low and steady. "You can't break a species that has faced extinction time and time again and still found a way to survive. You don't understand what it means to never give up, to keep fighting no matter what." Alara stood motionless, the weight of his words sinking in. For the first time, she realized that the true strength of humanity lay not in their technology or their military might, but in their unyielding spirit. Carter was right. The Corin Empire had underestimated the human mind, and that could be their greatest mistake. And as the psionics withdrew, Alara knew that this encounter was just the beginning. The human mind was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Captain Alara paced the dimly lit corridors of her flagship, her mind tangled with thoughts of the human she had captured. Sergeant David Carter's resistance had shaken her belief in the Corin's superiority. For the first time in her long career, she had encountered a being who seemed to embody something that defied the very essence of power, something she couldn't control or break. His mind, His resolve was like a fortress that not even the most advanced Koran technology could breach. What was it about humans? How could a species so young, so seemingly fragile, continue to survive time and time again, even when faced with extinction? Alara's thoughts were clouded with frustration, and she knew she needed answers. She decided to confront Carter once again. The time for subtlety had passed. It wasn't just about gathering information anymore. It was about understanding the human spirit, what made it so resilient. She ordered the guards to bring Carter to her personal quarters, a stark, minimalist room with a panoramic view of the stars outside. As Carter was escorted in, he looked just as he always did, unfazed, steady, and unbroken. He met her gaze without hesitation, his posture relaxed, as if he were speaking with an old acquaintance. Alara, however, was far from calm. She was on edge, her thoughts racing. "You've resisted everything we've thrown at you," she said, her voice cold yet tinged with genuine curiosity. "I've seen species break under less pressure. So tell me, Carter, why? Why do you humans continue to survive, even when faced with extinction? You're weak, your technology is primitive compared to ours. And yet, you keep going. What makes you so different?" Carter's expression softened, and for a moment, but it was quickly replaced by something else, something deeper, something that stirred something within her that she couldn't quite place. He sat down calmly, as if the question itself required nothing more than a thoughtful reply. "You're right," he began, his voice steady but filled with an underlying passion. "We were weak once. When humanity first started to venture beyond our homeworld, we didn't have the advantages other species did. Our technology was rudimentary, and we were divided, constantly fighting wars, struggling for power, tearing each other apart. And yes, we came close to destroying ourselves. We almost wiped out everything that made us who we are." Alara leaned in slightly, intrigued. She had heard of the fall of Earth, the great wars and the plagues that followed, but hearing it from the mouth of a human, especially one who had lived through countless battles, felt different. It wasn't just a history lesson to him. It was part of his very being. He continued, "It wasn't just the wars. It was the way we treated each other, the betrayals, the constant hunger for power. We almost tore the planet apart. But here's the thing we learned: we don't just die. We don't give up. We rebuild. Every time we fall, we get up again, stronger, smarter. It's in our nature." Alara blinked, processing his words. She had always believed that survival was about strength, about domination. The Korean Empire had built its entire existence around the idea that power could crush all opposition. But Carter's words hinted at something she hadn't considered before. Humanity's strength wasn't about weapons or technology. It was about their mindset, their refusal to accept defeat. Carter's voice grew quieter, almost contemplative. The fall of Earth wasn't the end of humanity. It was just another beginning. After the wars, we rebuilt. We learned from our mistakes. And we didn't just survive, we evolved. We made ourselves better, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. We started to see the value in cooperation, in sharing, in creating a world where everyone had a place. And then, when we finally looked out beyond our own world, we didn't see other species as enemies. We saw them as allies and challengers. We didn't just want to survive, Alara. We wanted to thrive. Alara's mind raced as she processed his words. She had expected to hear tales of battle, of human heroics on the front lines, of soldiers who had fought bravely and died for their cause. But this was something entirely different. Carter wasn't speaking about victory in the traditional sense. He wasn't talking about overpowering an enemy. He was speaking about resilience, about the human ability to overcome the darkest of times and rebuild, not just as individuals, but as a species. It was a concept so foreign to Alara, who had been taught her entire life that power was the ultimate means of survival. Carter continued, unaware of the turmoil his words were causing within Alara. When humanity left Earth, we carried that spirit with us. Even when we encountered hostile species, when the odds were against us, we fought not with just our weapons, but with our will. We fought for something bigger than ourselves, our freedom, our place in the stars. And even now, when everything is at its worst, we keep pushing forward. We refuse to be destroyed. That's why we survive. The room fell silent as Carter finished his story, his gaze steady on Alara. His words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Alara, for the first time, found herself at a loss for words. She had always been the one with the answers, the one who held the power. She had always believed that strength was the defining factor of a species' survival. But here was a human, a soldier, telling her that survival wasn't just about strength. It was about the drive to keep going, to never give up, to evolve. It was about the human spirit. Outside the window, the stars twinkled in the vast emptiness of space, oblivious to the monumental conversation unfolding inside the ship. But Alara could feel something shifting within her. She had thought she understood what it meant to conquer, to bend the will of others. But now, as she listened to Carter's story, she began to understand something deeper. There was more to humanity than she had ever realized. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about refusing to ever give in. And that, Ella realized with a growing sense of unease, was the most dangerous weapon of all. Asc the moments passed. She found herself questioning everything she had known about strength, about survival, and about the humans who had made her question it all. The tension aboard the flagship had reached an unbearable height. Captain Alara could feel it in every passing moment, in every glance exchanged between her officers, in every whisper that traveled through the corridors like a creeping shadow. For days now, she had been locked in conversation with Sergeant David Carter, probing deeper into the core of humanity's spirit. Each story he shared, each revelation about his people's history, had unearthed something she could not ignore. There was a raw, untamable force within humans, a drive that defied reason and fear. As she listened to him, she began to see them not as just another species to conquer, but as something more, something that could either prove a powerful ally or a deadly threat. But in the quiet corners of her ship, her officers were growing uneasy. Whispers had begun circulating, small fragments of doubt that slowly merged into a louder voice. Some of the crew, those who had served under Alara for years, were now questioning the mission. There were murmurs about the human spirit, about the strength it embodied, and the possibility that perhaps the Koran Empire had miscalculated. Could humanity be a force that could not be controlled? Could they offer something more than mere conquest? For the first time in Alara's career, she sensed the very foundation of her command beginning to crack. Lieutenant Vorka, a seasoned officer who had fought in numerous campaigns, was one of the first to approach her with concern. "Captain," he began, his voice low but steady, "have you ever considered what humanity might offer if we were to stop fighting them? Could they not be the key to something greater?" His eyes were filled with uncertainty, as though he feared even speaking the thought aloud. But the seed had been planted, and it began to take root in the hearts of others. The more Carter spoke, the more the Koran began to doubt their path. Their empire had been built on dominance, on control, on the crushing of any species that dared to challenge their superiority. But humans were different. They didn't yield. They didn't break. Could they truly teach the Koreans something valuable? Could the Korean Empire be saved from its own stagnation by embracing this human spark? Alara was torn. She understood the power of the Korean Empire, the centuries of dominance and control that had shaped her entire existence. The Koran were built to dominate, to crush any opposition beneath their boot. That was the way of the galaxy. But Carter's words had shaken her foundation. There was something undeniably captivating about the way humanity had survived, thrived, and evolved. They didn't just fight to conquer, they fought to endure. Their spirit was untouchable, and it was beginning to change her perspective. And yet, to consider abandoning the Koran way was unthinkable. She couldn't let the Koran Empire fall into chaos. The empire needed to maintain its strength, its absolute dominance, and she had sworn an oath to protect that. To entertain the idea of an alliance with humanity, no matter how tempting, was to risk everything she had fought for. She had worked her entire life to rise within the ranks, and now, in a moment of crisis, the very foundation of her beliefs was being questioned. Could she truly risk the downfall of the Koran for the sake of something as intangible as humanity's spirit? Her internal conflict reached its breaking point one cold, silent night. Alora stood alone in her quarters, staring out at the stars, when a soft chime broke the silence. Her communicator buzzed with an urgent message. It was from Exoreth, her most trusted ally and one of the highest-ranking officers aboard the ship. She'd always relied on him for counsel, his loyalty unquestioned. But tonight, his message was anything but expected. "Captain," Zoreth's voice crackled through the transmission. "I have made a decision." The weight of his words hung heavily in the air. "I can no longer stand by and watch the Koran Empire make the same mistakes over and over again. There is a faction of humans who understand the potential of what you and I could achieve together. I have been in contact with them. They believe in an alliance." Alora's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet as Zoreth's words sank in. "What are you saying, Zoreth?" she asked, her voice cold, betraying none of the tumult within her mind. "I'm offering you a choice, Captain," Zoreth replied, his tone steady but filled with an undeniable edge of finality. "I have a plan to release Sergeant Carter. I can get him out of here. We can offer him freedom, and in return, he can help us form a new future one, where the Koran and humanity work together, rather than against each other." Alora was stunned. Her mind raced as she processed the weight of Zoreth's words. Her closest ally, the officer she had trusted above all others, was betraying her. The revelation hit her like a blow to the chest. This was no longer a matter of diplomacy. This was a mutiny. "Zoreth," Alora said, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and anger, "you're asking me to betray everything I've worked for. You want me to turn my back on the Empire, to risk it all for what? A future where humanity takes the lead? You want me to risk everything for an alliance with a species you barely understand?" Zoreth's voice softened. "Captain, this isn't about giving up the Empire. It's about evolving, about understanding that there's more to survival than just crushing those weaker than us. The Koran Empire has been stagnant for centuries. You know it as well as I do. We need change. The humans Carter, they can teach us something. We need to adapt." Alora's mind spun, the weight of his betrayal crashing down on her. She had trusted Exoreth. He had been her most loyal officer, her confidant, and now he was offering her a way out and escape from the crushing path of domination. But it came at a price. The Koran Empire would never forgive her if she allowed Carter to escape, let alone consider an alliance with humanity. It would mean insurrection, chaos, and possibly civil war. Standing in the silence of her quarters, Alora was torn. Her heart pulled in two directions. Could she embrace this new path, this uncertain future with humanity? Or would she crush the hope of something different for the sake of the Empire's survival? She looked at the cold, gleaming stars beyond her window, wondering if the choice she made now would change the course of history. Zoreth's betrayal was a direct challenge to her authority, a dangerous gamble that could either shatter everything she had worked for or open the door to an entirely new future. The question was, would she have the courage to make the right choice, even if it meant risking everything she had known and believed in? The decision was hers to make, and the consequences would shape the galaxy forever. The weight of Alora's decision pressed down on her with a force she had never known. She had chosen the path of rebellion, aligning herself with Sergeant David Carter and the humans, but it was a choice that came with a heavy cost. The Koran Empire, unforgiving and relentless, would never allow such defiance to go unpunished. Soon, the unmistakable shadow of the Koran fleet loomed on the horizon, an overwhelming force ready to crush the rebellion under its iron fist. But Alora, standing at the helm of her own ship now, felt a strange sense of clarity. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back. It wasn't just the fate of humanity that hung in the balance, it was the future of the galaxy itself. The humans, though vastly outnumbered, were ready. Carter's leadership had proven invaluable. He had taken on the impossible task of leading a motley crew of rebels, fighters, and misfits who had learned to survive against the odds. They had no superior technology, no overwhelming firepower, just an unyielding determination to fight for a new future. Carter, standing at the center of their resistance, led them with a sharp mind and a keen sense of tactics, always thinking one step ahead. It was the unpredictability of the humans that gave them an edge. While the Koran fleet advanced with all the precision and coordination expected of an empire of their power, Carter's forces used tactics that made no sense, shifting positions without warning, luring their enemies into traps with feints and ambushes, using every scrap of the ship's materials to create weapons and defenses out of nothing. Elara watched from the command center of her ship, unable to tear her eyes away from the chaos unfolding before her. The Koran fleet, so used to dominating any battlefield, seemed to be stumbling. Their ships, usually graceful and precise, now appeared clumsy as the humans outwitted them at every turn. It was as though the humans were an entirely new kind of enemy, one that couldn't be predicted, one that was too adaptable to be overpowered by sheer force. The battle raged on, and the Korean fleet began to lose its grip. Carter's fleet was scattered across the battlefield, but every movement seemed to lead the Koran into a more vulnerable position. The humans fought like desperate animals, but there was something far more dangerous in their fight, a sense of recklessness that defied logic, a willingness to sacrifice everything for a cause they could not abandon. The Koran, in contrast, fought like an empire too accustomed to victory, too reliant on its own strength. They never expected their enemy to be so unpredictable. The humans, led by Carter's genius, turned what should have been a massacre into a fierce struggle, one that saw the Koran forces on the defensive for the first time in centuries. Amidst the chaos, Elara found herself watching Carter, her mind torn. She had once seen him as just a soldier, just another human caught in a war too big for him to understand. But now, as the battle unfolded, she saw him for what he truly was, a force of nature, a symbol of everything she had misunderstood about humanity. He wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting to create something new, something better. His soldiers fought alongside him, inspired by his unshakable belief that they could win against all odds, against all logic. They had no fear of death because they had already learned to live through it. It was a mindset that Elara, for the first time, could see as a strength. As the final moments of the battle drew near, the Koran fleet began to retreat. It wasn't a surrender, it was a desperate flight, a forced withdrawal from a battlefield that had gone terribly wrong. Elara's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the enemy forces pull back, their once proud ships limping away in disarray. The humans had done the impossible. They had turned the tide of an unwinnable battle, not with superior technology, but with something far more powerful. They had fought with their hearts, with their minds, and with a unity that was impossible to break. As the last Koran ships fled into the depths of space, Carter's voice crackled over the comms, low and resolute. "You thought you knew fear, Elara," he said, his words carrying across the vastness of space. "But you've never seen what humanity can do when it has nothing left to lose." Elara stood in silence, her gaze fixed on the retreating fleet. She felt the weight of his words sink in, and for the first time in her life, she understood the depth of what humanity was capable of. The Koran Empire had always been defined by power, its ships, its warriors, its technology. But now, she saw something far more dangerous. The humans didn't need the galaxy's strongest weapon or the most advanced technology to win. They only needed the will to keep going, to never give up, no matter what. With the Koran fleet in retreat and the rebellion victorious, Elara's mind began to shift. She had been a soldier of conquest, a defender of the Empire, but now she saw a future that could be so much more. The humans had proven their worth, not by conquering, but by creating. They had fought for a new kind of peace, a peace built on mutual respect and understanding. And in that moment, Elara realized she could no longer ignore the truth that had been staring her in the face all along. The Koran Empire, for all its power, had grown stagnant. But the humans, with all their flaws and imperfections, were capable of growth, of change. The aftermath of the battle was marked by the beginning of a new era. The Koran, those few who had seen the potential in humanity, began to speak of an alliance forged in the fires of war, but one that could lead to something greater. Elara, forever changed by the events that had unfolded, became one of the first to advocate for peace and cooperation between the Koran and humans. It was a dangerous path, one that could lead to her own downfall within the Empire, but it was the only path forward. Meanwhile, Carter and his fellow soldiers began to write a new chapter in the galaxy's history. They were no longer just survivors. They were pioneers, leaders of a revolution that had changed the course of the galaxy. Together, with Elora and those few Corran who shared her vision, they would build something new, a future where fear and conquest no longer ruled the stars. The battle had been won, but the war for a new galaxy had just begun.